Welcome to Ohioans Against Extremism podcast.
Oh my God, that was beautiful.
I've been training for that my whole life.
So today we want to talk about some issues that relate to the lives of rural Ohioans. You know, we know that we've talked a lot about education, we've talked a lot about our economy, and there are unique sets of issues that are facing farmers, that are facing people in rural school districts. And we are here to have a conversation with someone who happens to be an expert on all of those topics. So we are joined here today by our new friend and former representative, John Patterson. John, thanks for meeting with us.
All right. Well, I am John Patterson. And first of all, I live in extreme Northeast Ohio, Jefferson, if you know where Pennsylvania line is, and Canada. That's a county that we abut, quite frankly. So for me, it's always a trip to Columbus. When I was in the House, I had the longest drive of anybody. And I took great pride in that because I was coming to do the people's work. And that was important. Happily married, I might add, for 42 years to Nancy. She's a retired teacher as well, as am I. And two kids, two sons, shouldn't call them kids anymore, 140, 138. And they are the proud products of public education. So speaking of education, I did my undergrad. I started at Kent State Ashtabula and transferred to Marietta College, a bachelor's in 78. And then, if you can imagine, coming out with a teaching degree, there was a glut of social studies teachers in 1978. Couldn't find a job. So on a whim, I went from Marietta over to Ohio University. They offered me a scholarship to do my master's. So I had my master's by June of 79. So now I'm overqualified for a typical school district to go in and teach. And I was going to go to law school, like you two. But with my coaching background at Marietta, I went there to be a student assistant coach. Kent State called Ashtabula, was looking for a baseball coach. So I did that while I substituted to make ends meet. And in the summertime, I worked for the county highway department, and I eventually went full-time because it provided health benefits that I didn't have when I was teaching. Got married in the summer of 83, and just a few weeks after that, a week before school started, my high school principal called and said, "Would you be interested in teaching?" And I was kind of hesitant because by golly, I was going to finish off my PhD and get on with the world. But my wife said, you ought to consider that because that's what you went to school for. And we would have time together and it'd just be a parallel universe. So I said yes. I was hired the day before the first day of school officially. That's how quick it was.
So much time.
Because there was a vacancy. And here's the ironic thing. I told my principal, I said, I'm working on my doctorate. I can give you a year, but after that, I don't know. Well, 29 years later, I retired. And let me share with you some of the things I did while I was teaching, and then we're going to get into the legislature and why I stepped forward. Fair enough?
Yes, absolutely.
So over the years, I coached JV baseball, head girls basketball coach. I was a golf coach for a while. And head cross-country coach for my last 12 years. I was the Model UN advisor for 28 years out of the 29. I was the academic challenge coach for 28 years. I was the chief negotiator for our union for over 20 years. And student council advisor, that sort of thing. Anything that brought me closer to the students so that we could help shape them and mold them and give them an opportunity, give them hope about a greater world. And I want to share this with you. The subject of my PhD dissertation is the long-term efficacious impact of Model UN simulations. Now, what does that mean? Political efficacy. As a social studies teacher, we want our students to vote. We want them to hold office. We want them to feel empowered to do great things. And there was something happening in Model UN that my students were talking constantly about world and international issues and local issues, and they did a peace rally before the Iraqi conflict there, Operation Desert Storm, and it dawned on me that if we could get students interested in playing around in a safe way with debate and international issues, local issues, then they'll take it from there. And the dissertation found that over 66% of my students, it was a longitudinal simulation I did, looked back 8 years, and the young students at that time were 18 to 25. Here's the amazing thing. Over 66% of them voted in every election. And that was what they're doing. Why? Because they felt they could make a difference. It's all about efficacy. Some of my students, my goodness gracious, one of my students is the president of the Cleveland Teachers Union, Sherry Obrinsky. Another one you might have run across her, Kristen Boggs, was former assistant minority leader and now Justice Boggs. Another one of my students, Linda Medic, Linda Jacobson, now is with Legislative Service Commission. I had former students lobbying me when I was in the House, which was always a cool experience. Bottom line is, people have to feel that their vote makes a difference, that their participation makes a difference. And that's why I am so excited to be with you here today, to let people know it's a good thing to get involved in something that our founders wanted us to do. We have a moral and civic obligation to protect our democracy, and that means to protect everybody who lives here, regardless of their race, creed, color, or orientation. This place works when we all work together. So, what got me into the Ohio House? The Kasich budget cuts, quite frankly. And this goes back to 2010. School boards have to run on a on a budget that has to be balanced. They, at the time, and this was just changed this last budget cycle, have to operate on a 5-year forecast. Now it's a 4-year forecast. So they have to project where their money's coming in. The problem is the state only operates on a 2-year budget. So that means years 3 and 4, you can't count on anything from the state potentially. And that's what gets school districts behind the 8 ball. So when those cuts came, I saw programs being cut, art, music, and gym in the elementary level, some of the vocational agriculture, FFA programs, those enrichment programs. And I know that every kid came to school to take my history class, no doubt about it.
Of course.
That was their number one priority. But I had a sense that some of them came for some other reasons. And the problem is that they began to become disenchanted with school. There were attendance issues. There were discipline issues. The public school is the first and the last time, first of all, we're in the same sandbox together. We begin to develop empathy for one another. And with that empathy comes civility. If you understand other people, you can begin to work through common challenges together and not marginalizing anybody. So I saw that these programs were being cut. Kids weren't happy. So I thought I should do something. And I was at the point in my career that I could retire and run for office. And I did so in 2012. And that was the main thing, was to create a fair funding formula for our schools so that superintendents could plan ahead, so that students could have those enrichment opportunities. Now, I have a question for you too.
Please.
Go back into your high school years and tell me some of the extracurriculars you participated in while a student.
It's funny while you were talking about Model UN, I instantly thought about my time in Coming Together, which I'm really dating myself. But there was a program that worked countywide in Summit County, where as student leaders, we would put on these workshops based on what were considered controversial topics for teenagers at the time.
Right.
And we would invite students from the schools all across the county, and we would have large and small group conversations, exactly to accomplish exactly what you just detailed. The idea of having civic discourse, the idea of being able to communicate disagreements without some of the vitriol that we see today. I often look back to that model and some of the exercises that we did then and wonder if any of those exercises would be useful today because, just as you said, we have gotten to a place where we've lost empathy, we've lost civility, and we've lost the ability to, build in and change society together.
Yes.
I was not in any way political at all. I did sports. I did sports and more sports. I know, but I only did sports.
Okay, fair.
What sports did you do?
Society. In high school, I did volleyball, track, specifically pole vault, and tennis.
Super.
And then just in general throughout my life, add in basketball, gymnastics, golf, a handful of other ones. So, yeah.
So now let me ask you this. Where would your life be if you didn't have or participated in those extracurricular activities?
What's really funny, or not funny, I guess, but really interesting about that question is that when I was going to school, it was when they were starting to implement pay to play for sports and activities. And it was a huge deal when we started doing pay to play. And I think the funding formula was originally per kid, and then it was like capped per family. And I know that they've messed around with it, but that was a real barrier to entry for families to even participate in sports. And I remember thinking like, man, that really is a shame because I feel like everyone should have the ability to participate. Because I feel like I learned how to be like I learned how to do my job now more from sports than from academia.
Absolutely.
I believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The discipline, the teamwork that's necessary. And if you hadn't had that experience, your life would be radically different. And that's my point. In our public schools, we ought to offer a cornucopia of experiences for kids that they may never, ever come into contact with for the rest of their life, but at least be exposed to it. We never know what's going to touch or move us unless we have that as an option to at least try.
Absolutely.
And that's why I was determined to fix school funding so that superintendents and treasurers could plan ahead, develop programs, maintain programs for the benefit of our kids. So I was elected in the fall of 2012, had a number of my students with us on knocking doors and such that summer. And then I took office in January of 13, and by the next fall, I'd learned where the restrooms were, who the lobbyists were, all that sort of thing.
I don't know where.
By December of 13, I had formed the school funding caucus.
Oh, wow.
So it was the beginning. And that's when some of the members, I really got to know members of the lobbying groups who supported public education. And I'm proud to say it was a bipartisan group, this funding caucus. So we began to explore ways in which we could fund public education. So time goes on, and I realize it's all about money. So in my next term, I asked to be put on finance committee because that's where the game is played. And thankfully, Leader Strayhorn granted me that request. And then I found myself on the subcommittee for primary secondary education. So a subcommittee, think of 40 people on the finance committee, and then there's at the time 6 or 7 maybe subcommittees. There were 5 of us who dealt with school funding for 5 to 6 weeks every other year, figure out how Ohio was going to fund its schools. Now, I was fortunate because the first year I was on that subcommittee, some guy had just lost a race for the Ohio Supreme Court, and he agreed to run for the House. He had served in the Senate. You may have heard of this fellow before. His name is Robert Cupp. Okay?
The name rings a bell.
Rings a bell.
Yeah. No,
it would.
If I can pause and just kind of reflect, you've shared a lot, so I just want to kind of dive into because I feel like what's really interesting about your story is how you sort of took your experience with students and you made a legislative agenda from that experience. And I think that's a really interesting transition to have made. And now, now we're getting into the meat and potatoes of some of the political dynamics at the State House. But I think it's worth just kind of acknowledging it's a big career shift, and yet your career background is what made you good at that career shift. So I think that that's kind of important to note. Do you have any other thoughts about any of the things so far?
I'm just dreaming of a time when there was adequate funding for the public schools in Ohio.
And a willingness of across the aisle collaboration. We miss it. We miss it. Okay, so you and Mr. Robert Cup get in the same room, and
Yeah.
what happens?
Oh my goodness, we developed a very close relationship, not only within the State House and our politics, but our wives. We became family because we understood how important this is. So we served that time, my first time on the budget, and we're just trying to figure out what's going on, where the money is, and basically we enacted the CASIC funding model because we didn't have any other alternative. You can't do much in 5 weeks because school funding is so complex. Well, the next go around, it was in we were reelected, both of us, in 16. So in 17, we're dealing with the budget again. And the personal property tax was the TPP, the tangible personal property tax, was being phased out, especially with respect to electric generating plants. Coal-fired plants, some of them were going offline, and schools were losing that source of income. I'll never forget this. We had a school district, Manchester Local, from down on the Ohio River. Now imagine in your school district, not one, but 2 power plants, and they were both closing. The levy that district was going to have to put in front of their voters to make up for that lost income was, ready for this, 120 mills. 120 mills. There's no way.
So for the layperson, for the average Ohioan that's watching this podcast, what does that equate to?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, it depends on what a mill is, 1,000th of the valuation of your dollar or of your house.
Okay.
And so a typical levy would run anywhere from 1 mill to maybe 8 mills. If you're in desperate need, it might be a double digit, maybe 10, 12. It's rare to go.
So this was 10 times the normal.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because they were losing that revenue. That's why it's so crazy. Yeah. You never hear of a 120 mil levy. It just doesn't happen. So Representative Cupp and I decided that we would fudge the formula, because they weren't the only one. They were the worst example. Fudge the formula to drive more money to those districts so they wouldn't be held, so they just wouldn't go under. And we did that. And we made a pledge at that time that we would roll up our sleeves and really do something about school funding, because we just couldn't continue on. So we're reelected in 18. And at the same time, there was another fellow who was retiring, a former lobbyist. His name was Jim Betts. And Representative Cupp said, I know somebody who I think can help us with this, because he had all kinds of connections. So I met with Jim off-site, and we began to discuss all the facets of funding public education. And I'll run down that list shortly. But I knew he was our guy. And lo and behold, the Fair School Funding Work Group was born. Representative Cupp and I realized that legislators working every other year for 5 or 6 weeks could never come up with a comprehensive plan that was fair. So what would you do? If you're a humble leader, if you're looking for answers, you put the pride on the shelf and you go find the people who deal with this every day, which is why the Fair School Funding Group recruited superintendents and treasurers from around the state, rich districts, poor, not so rich districts, urban, rural, suburban. We wanted a representation, and here was their charge that we gave them. Whatever they came up with, it had to be justifiable, it had to be defensible, it had to be transparent, and it had to be scalable. And by that, I mean, this was not a wish list. What does it cost to educate students? Now, I can go into the DeRolf decisions if you want to really get into
all right.
it. You're okay.
Yeah.
Bottom line is that ultimately, I spent more time with Robert Cupp my last term in office, because we have term limits in Ohio, than I did with anybody in my own caucus, except for my roommate with whom I shared a one-bedroom apartment, his bed in the bedroom and mine in what would be the living room. I was in his office, he was in mine, working on this without any regard to party affiliation or labels. We were doing this for the kids of Ohio. And that's how you accomplish great things, working together. For this reason, we all have blind spots. We have built-in blind spots. We have some that we acquire. It takes that exchange of ideas, and that's why I think that's why I think I'm so happily married, that I listen to and hear other ideas that I might not come up with on my own. You know, that's the right thing to do, and everybody benefits. Same with legislation. I'll give you an example how legislation should be.
A follow-up question about working with Representative Cupp, because I think seeing the current dynamics at the Statehouse, there is not an appetite from the majority to even contemplate these type of collaborative across party conversations. Now, maybe for some small stuff there is, or
Numbers don't require it.
no, right. So I guess I'm asking, like, the numbers really didn't require it then either, though,
Okay.
right? So I mean, like, how did you get to a point where the Republicans even wanted to be working with you, even though they didn't need to?
Well, I got a break.
Okay.
And here's what happened. We rolled out our plan, and it was warmly received. But that was about the same time that the HB6 scandal unfolded.
Mm-hmm.
And Representative Householder was voted out of his position. And guess who the new Speaker of the House was? Robert Cupp. You can't make this stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
It was just blind luck. But he brought such integrity and such a calming influence that we needed to heal in that aftermath, that in December of 2020, when I'm headed out of office January 1st, HB 305 was brought to the floor, and it passed by an 83-9 vote.
Wow.
The funding plan. Now, we didn't have time because the terms were running out to move it in the Senate, but 305 became House Bill 1 in the new General Assembly, which means it's the highest
I was
priority.
going to say, so let's translate that for the listeners here. So typically, the first 10 or so bills that the House and the Senate introduced are considered their highest priority bills. So you'll see if it's a single digit number, you know that this is a very high percentage. So when you say it went from 300 to 1, that's a pretty substantial jump.
Yeah. Top of the deck for the next.
Top of the deck.
For the next group.
Yeah. And he made that happen. It became part of the budget that year.
Oh, wow.
And the nuts and bolts were put in. Now, the problem is, let me go back to the funding formula for a moment. It's fair because we account for every cost that a school district would encounter, from turning on the lights to librarians to school resource officers to textbooks to Chromebooks, transportation, English language learners, gifted students, economically challenged students. Everything is in there. And that meets the thorough component of the DeRolf decisions, that we have to provide an adequate education for our kids. Well, when the costs are there, and by the way, in case there are any skeptics, we threw out the very high salaries and the very low salaries to determine and to take a teacher's salary that's average across the state, including benefits, as a starting block. And then I'll give you an example. We used pupil teacher ratios. In kindergarten, for example, 20 to 1. In high school, 27 to 1, students to teacher. All this based on research. So we did not require schools to spend money based on some formula that the state concocted. We essentially were able to calculate what each district, and I'll give you an example, what each district needed. And then I can get into the distribution component if you want. But the state should pick up the rest. If we know what it costs and what the local capacity is, the state ought to pick up the rest, and everything's done.
So would it be fair to say that your formula, and I don't think we need to dive, frankly, I don't think that our audience will be that.
No. That's
So formula,
but also the way that I would love to talk about that at another time, because that's
Ainslee has follow-up questions. The audience probably doesn't.
That's the kind of thing that excites me. But I'm alone in that.
But oh gosh, what was I going to say? I was going to talk about the funding formula. Right now, I guess my real quick off the cuff question, because, we're listening to all of this very functional logic around the funding formula, and then we're looking at what we've got. And so I guess my question to you is, like, your formula would have, just to clarify decisively, made it so that we had to be less reliant on local property taxes to fund our schools. Would that be accurate?
That is absolutely correct. For this reason, the state has failed to do its part. During the DeRolf decisions, the state share was about 42%. By the end of this budgetary cycle, the state share is going to be down to 32%. Meanwhile, the costs have risen. Look at groceries, everything else. The costs of running schools have increased. And we provided, it was so expensive, a 6-year phase-in for this to catch up. But you have to update the inputs, teacher salaries, cost of electricity, all that, to make it fair so it doesn't get out of whack with inflation. And this legislature failed to fully implement the data input updates. And as a result, the gap has widened. And if the state isn't doing its part, the schools who have to balance their budget have to look at the local property owners. Now, that's the school funding part. There's also a problem with property taxes as they ballooned out of control. We could get into that if you want to. So it's a 1-2 punch here that are really putting our schools behind the eight ball. And here's something that people have to understand. In my district, there still is a private prison, privately owned, privately operated. And I spent a lot of time there because even before I took office, there was a heroin overdose inside. Something wasn't right. So to make matters better, my first act was to ask for a surprise inspection, find out what's going on. And over the course of the few years that I was in the House, I would visit there and I would ask the men who were there. And I also was at death row asking them the same question. What do you want me to take out of this? What should I know? And to a man, they said, teach the kids how to read. If kids don't get a proper education, if our society isn't educated, people are going to survive somehow. And we can either pay up front and invest in education, or we can pay on the back end with incarceration. Take your choice.
Oh, I couldn't agree with that more. And I feel like that was something I learned from working at the public defender too, was, our first task when you're in the public defender is to kind of get someone's, I guess, like very brief life history, their education, their age, whatever. And the number of people who dropped out in 6th grade and 12th grade was so frustrating because in 6th grade, you're like, they're literally 11. Yeah, like their lives were decided at 11. Mm-hmm. And the seniors, it's like, oh my God, you were so close. Like you were so close. And now you don't know the high school. But it was so determinative in them sitting there locked up, in need of a public defender.
As you're saying this, I can't help but think about the recent news that they have cut busing for high school students in Columbus just because they don't have the resources. And to think about, the pipeline of dropout to incarceration, on top of all the other things that we've discussed, industry closing down, inflation getting out of control. It seems like we are entering a tailspin that if we don't figure out a way to right ourselves, we may not be able to get ourselves out of. Am I being hyperbolic?
Well, no, and I also think that's even worsened by all of this. We haven't even talked about vouchers yet, or the weight of these private schools' budgets on our public school. But there was specific outcry here in Columbus because the private schools were insisting that they were entitled to busing to their school. While the public school was getting, in the legislature, exactly. And that is because the legislature essentially favors the charter schools over the public schools in how that they have, drafted their funding priorities. And it causes these schools now have to raise money to defend these lawsuits, right? Like every time there's a lawsuit, every time someone's trying to further defund these public schools, it only gets worse. And the vouchers, what they took $1 billion out of the
Yes.
budget, right?
And the literacy rate is terrible. To your point, the literacy rates right now are so low that, and I try not to be apocalyptic with this, right? But I don't see how we run a functioning society without at least getting back to, what numbers used to look like when we were in school. And I say that, I'm from Akron. I'm from, a small city in Ohio. And even then, the difference between, some of the private schools that I was privileged enough to go to and public schools, the gap wasn't a canyon. Like you could go to, I could list, 3 or 4 public high schools in Akron off the top of my head where, you were known to get a very solid education that would prepare you not only for college, but for life. And it just, the way that the test scores are trending and the funding is trending, and please give us some hope here, but I just don't see how this leads to anything good.
I was a history teacher, and you have to go back to the wisdom of the land ordinance of 1785, which created townships.
Now you're talking English language for the record.
You like my eyes.
I sense it. She loves that.
This is my jam. If we get into Reconstruction, we might need to book another hour.
I'm going to tell you what both of
Okay. But you understand how when Ohio was being settled, public education was important. Without an educated populace, democracy cannot be sustained. End of statement. End of story. And if we really want to create haves and have-nots, the easiest way is to eliminate or greatly curtail the public school. And that creates inequality. And that's something that we can't stand for. And we have to all get in the fight here to preserve public education for the benefit of not only ourselves, but for our kids and grandchildren. The future of Ohio is at stake right now.
Well, I think that was a perfect cherry on top of that education. So we'll move on to our next, which is, I think one thing that's then really interesting about your own background is you went from that to doing your current role as I don't want to mess up, but the USDA Farm Service Agency Executive Director of Ohio. Is that?
That's a really big title.
It's a really, really big.
What does that mean?
Yeah. So, well, that, and also while you're telling us what it means, how did that happen? Right. Because you just talked to us about your education being your background and all of that. So how'd you get into this role?
All right. Good question. Fair question. Now, remember I said I live in Jefferson?
Yes.
3,000 people in the village. Our school district encompasses 11 townships. Okay. Although I didn't live on a farm kids, I grew up with them. I went out to their farms and those kids came to our house And of course, the teaching here, you just have, it's part of the DNA. So I asked for my very first term to be placed on the Ag Committee, and I served on the Ag Committee for 8 years, 4 terms. I was ranking member. That means the minority member who is most sought after for others for advice, ranking for 2 terms. I would have been there for 3 terms, except I was made co-chairman of the primary secondary subcommittee on education with Bob Cupp my last term. At any rate, 8 years on ag. I'm familiar with that. I live in an ag area, so it is a presidential appointment. And I got a call from some guy, you may have heard of him, Sherrod Brown.
We've heard the name. We've heard the name.
Maybe asking if I would be interested in becoming the state executive director. And I said, certainly, because it has to do with ag. So here's what the director does. Under the umbrella of USDA, there are like 27, 28 different agencies. Farm Service Agency is one. We have offices in 66 counties around the state. We offer farm loans. We offer conservation loans. We offer crop insurance, all of that. And it's important to have those people in critical areas in order to serve our farm folks. So I was in charge of over 300 people in 66 offices around the state. And we had the home office is in Columbus, obviously. But you need to know what I got into.
Please.
There was this little train derailment in a place called East Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, think of all the chemicals in the air, think of all the environmental impacts, and think of all the farm folks in that area on both sides of the line.
Yeah.
I was charged with leading the USDA response for that on both sides of the line. I gathered Farm Bureau members and Farmers Union members and local agricultural folks and farm service from both sides to monitor what was going on. And I'll give you an example how dreadful that was. Apples that had been picked in the fall prior to the derailment were being blackballed in some markets because they were from Columbiana County.
Yeah.
They were in storage when that happened. But there were other instances of people not buying produce or anything else from the county. So working closely with the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency and the federal EPA, we were able to do some hand-holding, if you will, and planning to help these farmers who might otherwise have encountered terrible financial times through no fault of their own. So that took a lot of effort to coordinate that. And then the year after that, there was this little thing called a drought in Ohio.
Yeah.
And we, because we offer crop insurance and farm folks can come in and register with us, we didn't have enough personnel in Southeast Ohio to cover the demand because the paperwork is so long. Working with my staff, we figured out a way to move personnel and to pay for this from Northern Ohio to Southeast and Southern Ohio in order to handle the paperwork. We had in right after Labor Day, we had appointments scheduled till Thanksgiving. People wanting to come in. We just needed more workers there. So in order to have them have a temporary assignment, put them up in a hotel, feed them, we had to work on budgets, but it was imperative that I had enough boots on the ground to help our farmers. And that was a major initiative that took up a lot of our time, but we did it. We worked closely with the Ohio Department of Agriculture as well. In fact, Brian Baldridge, the director, and I served together in the House. Mm-hmm. So, and my successor, Don Jones, and I served together in the House. Don was there when the administrator, this is a cute story. So Zach Ducheneau was the administrator of all the farm service agencies throughout the nation. And in Guam and Puerto Rico. I mean, he was the big deal. So I get a call on a Thursday afternoon. Director Duchesneau wants to come out and see the effects of the drought. Okay, when's he coming? He's coming tomorrow. I ended up picking him up at the airport in Pittsburgh, driving him to Harrison County, and then getting him back to the airport, setting up a meeting so that he could meet with the farmers who are directly impacted. Things like that you could never predict, but it was a pleasure and a privilege to work in that agency until January of this year, when I resigned, obviously, because it's a political appointment. I just can't say enough about my folks there who really care about farming and preserving the integrity. By the way, farming is our number one industry in Ohio.
So this must be a really frustrating time for you, and seeing all of these big things happen to the Ohio farming community, and having been so recently at the helm of being able to help them. I don't want to assume you know how you feel, but I would have to think that might be a little bit of a helpless feeling, to feel like you used to have these, ways to help these farmers and now you don't. I mean, what's it like watching, just on a more just like human being level? What's it like watching some of this stuff happen with the soybean farmers and the tariffs?
I mean, even beyond that, we'll throw out a couple more crops. You look at what's happening with the legislation around marijuana. Now, that is an emerging industry here in Ohio. But, for those that have decided to invest in it and invest their labor into it, I'm sure that these have been really destabilizing times. And so, I just kind of want to add another layer of complexity onto the tariffs and everything else that's happening, especially because you have more insight than anyone else in this room about, how, like Marie said, on a human level, did one navigating those types of changes, but also being reassuring to the community and to industry, because, as you said, that is, what butters the bread in Ohio.
So let me ask you both a question, and you can collaborate here.
Okay.
Because it leads to something. How much do you think a new stripped-down tractor costs?
I'm gonna go. What else? I'm gonna go 130.
I think that's probably fair.
130. 130,000.
You're pretty good, on the mark for a stripped-down tractor. Now, what do you think a new combine costs?
I wish I knew what a combine did.
Stripped down. You know what a combine is?
I don't. The tractor.
That's why I'm doing this.
Okay, yeah.
Have you seen the big machines with the headers on them? That's like the thing that's in the front of going through a field. Yes, and you see all the dust.
Yes.
Okay, and it's very, very wide.
Yes.
That's a combine.
That looks expensive.
How much do you think one of those costs? Now that you know what it is,
let's say 700.
Okay, that's higher than I was going, but also I'm gonna go with it. Let's go with 7. I was gonna go 3.
It was lower than I wanted to say. So.
I was gonna go 300,000, but we'll go 700,000.
Should we do 5? Should we split the difference? Let's split
5. I like this.
Compromise.
How much?
500,000.
750,000 stripped.
All right.
All right.
Those are some astronomical numbers, especially in a state where the minimum wage is $8, $9. And I mean, everything else that we talk about as far as like median income and, all the things, those are some really big numbers.
Yeah.
So why do you suppose I did that exercise with you?
To blow my mind.
Thank you. For one thing, because I was one of the last groups of rural Democrats.
Okay.
And the bridge between the Republican Party, especially rural Republicans, and our urban Democrats came through a handful of us. I'll give you an example, then I'm going to go back to the farming.
Okay.
When we talked about gun safety, my urban Democrats were thinking typically of a 7-Eleven getting robbed or some of the violence in the street. Out here, when we think of gun safety, it's about killing deer who are doing damage to our wineries and making sure that they don't populate the roadways, if you know what I mean. It's varmint control. It's filling the freezer.
Yeah.
For the winter months. And by the way, if you ever get a chance to sample deer jerky, it is fantastic.
I've had it.
Oh, yeah.
I've had it. It's delicious.
Oh yeah. We're
So my
still
point
on
is,
Iowans, don't you worry.
it's,
Might not know what a combine.
Right, it's right. But I do
Yeah, you
know,
know, yeah.
Cabela's. I know you can go there and get the
Yeah.
if you want to ride in a combine sometime, give me a call and we'll make sure that happens. It's a
I'm
rush.
going to take you up on
I
that.
want to video
Yeah.
Ainslee in a combine. I don't know that I even want to be in one myself. I
That's
just
fun.
want to.
One, I'll have a GoPro so you can get the first person view, and then I'm just
Perfect.
gonna
That
it's just like a
is
pure reaction
perfect.
video because it's I'm too excited. I have to calm down.
No, and you know what? When you said the point about the guns, I think that's really important, and that's a point that I've made in several different coalition conversations because you have folks who are, they say people with guns, and they sort of mean this, nefarious thing. And I just less than 2 months ago had to tell people, I said, listen, when you live 20 minutes away from the nearest police station,
Right.
your security system is your shotgun.
Yeah.
That's just what it is, So I feel like that divide around what we even think about when we're talking about guns is so vast.
But that's why we have to have the conversation from the different perspectives
Absolutely.
to arrive at what works as best it can for everybody.
Right.
So let's go back to farming for a moment. We oftentimes think of farmers as ma and pa with the pitchfork, the American Gothic painting.
Yep, I'm with you.
Exactly. These are business people, and it's very expensive because we just touched on equipment, let alone the land or the cost of fertilizer, the cost of seed, or the amount of time that has to go in. And that's just with row crops. If you're into dairy or beef or poultry, or pork, there's all kinds of other costs too that go with it. It is a business. People have to understand that it's a business, and farmers have to turn a profit in order to survive, or they're out of business. And I'm telling you, when too many go out of business and we can't eat, bad things happen in the grocery aisle that spill out into the street.
Do you think that the Ohio farmers are, I know they're already feeling the impact of some of these policy changes. Like, do you think that it's sinking in, I guess, who's doing it to them, for like a better word, why this is happening?
So many different angles just here in Ohio.
Right.
There's obviously the big target, the big discussion that's happening nationally, but as we've been discussing, from a state perspective, it's kind of been cutting into what little fat there is in the industry as well. I would assume.
Yeah, I think they do understand, but are you familiar with the psychological term cognitive dissonance?
Oh yes.
And let me put it in a perspective that I think your listeners will understand. Research shows that women in an abusive relationship typically will, after that relationship ends, find another person
very similar
who is also an abuser because that's what's normal. And if you think back at times to when our parents told us, gave us information or an order, don't do that, do this, don't do that, we had to discover it on our own in order for it to really sink in, right? So I think we have to be respectful and give those folks space to come to those conclusions that they may have supported the wrong candidate in the race, but we can't condemn them. They did what they thought was right for them at that time. But I can tell you this. I was at Farm Science Review a few weeks ago, big gathering. Either of you been to that?
I haven't.
Oh my goodness. About the third week in September, the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, out at Molly Caron Farms, west of Columbus, off from 70. Ohio State puts this on. Okay. All kinds of farming implements. Kids come in buses. It's huge. But I happened to talk to some of the soybean guys, and one of them said to me, John, look out at the next soybean field you see and imagine every other row being decimated. And I kind of looked at him funny. He said, every other row is not being sold to China, and we don't have any buyers for it. And what do we do? Remember the cost of the combine? Yeah. Think of the fertilizer, everything else. So a lot of them that I'm hearing are putting it in storage over the winter, not selling it now, hoping that there's going to be a market in the spring.
Yeah.
But if things don't change, do they plant soybeans again next spring? Do they let the fields lie fallow? Do they plant corn instead and rearrange their crop rotation? A lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
And that impacts the bottom line. And here's what really concerns me. I'm concerned about mental health in rural areas because of the stress. And farm folks typically are fiercely independent. Not ones to seek, right? They're not ones to seek out help.
I come from farm people, so trust me, I know how
you know that.
stubborn we
And
can be.
males are even worse. I can say this because I'm a male. I can toughen this out. I worry about the mental health of those folks in the long run as this continues on. So to answer your question, my heart is breaking for our farm folks because this was brought on them and it didn't have to be like this.
Yeah. I could do this for another hour.
I know we're out of time.
Our producers are over here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just getting started, lady.
We can finish
We'll have you
this
back another time.
on the combine. Don't you worry. It's gonna be fodder for the combine because I want you to know I am coming out on the combine and 100%. I'm super excited for it.
100%.
But if we could tell or share one kind of, I don't want to call it a soundbite, but what kind of nugget of wisdom?
The 30-second nugget of wisdom.
For our listeners around, how the average Ohioan can participate in some sort of political process to affect the issues that we've just talked about. Because, I mean, it's dire. Everything we've talked about is dire. Food is dire. Education is dire. Property taxes are taken up.
So what's the prompt? The prompt is...
I don't know. I don't even know.
Okay.
I don't even know. Fix this. How do we fix this?
Well, I feel like that's a very bold 30-second question. So maybe to tighten that up a little bit. What is the one thing that Ohioans need to get through the next 3 years, 3.5 years?
That was good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Faith, hope, and vision.
Okay.
I like that.
We need faith that we can do this. We need hope.
That on a T-shirt or something, because the way I see it with the
I didn't even think about that. Let's market this. But we have to have faith that we can get through this. We have to have hope to get through the dark times, but we have to have a vision of where we want to be together.
I love that.
Thanks. That's a perfect wrap up. Well, we are so appreciative that you joined us, and
I'd love to do this again sometime.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, again, there might be a combine in our future, so maybe we can do an on-site dinner.
That's almost a guaranteed certainty, my friend.
So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much,
and we are thrilled to have you.
Well, thank you for listening to Ohioans Against Extremism podcast. If you want more, you can check us out at ohagainstextremism.org. Follow us on Twitter, No Extremism Ohio, and stay tuned, subscribe, and feel free to donate if your pockets allow it.